Week 2 of the college football season is already here, and we have a big noon game coming up. Here's your TV Watch Guide.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings. I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one.
All right, starting at noon this Saturday, September 7th. Not shocking at all. We, of course, have the Longhorns and the Michigan Wolverines, a game that has been long circled on the calendar, long been looked forward to. Of course, Michigan not quite looking the part in the opener. Texas, very much so. The Longhorns won 52-0 over Colorado State. Looks like they have a couple of receivers panning out at the very least, with Ryan Wingo, Isaiah Bond, Jontre Cook, Matthew Golden, all panning out pretty good in their win over the Rams. Quinn Ewers, not always great on the deep ball, but did a pretty good job against the Colorado Rams. Jarrett Gibson did a pretty good job as well, stepping into the rushing role, split with Jadon Blue, of course, with the starter going out there at that position. Freshman Jarrett Gibson coming in, the 5'10", 205 running back from Gainesville, Florida. So kind of an unexpected man to step up in that particular position. Michigan saw Davis Warren go 15 for 25 for 118 yards, a touchdown and a pick. Alex Orji throw some balls into the dirt. He did have a passing touchdown, but only threw a couple of passes and had 30 yards on the ground. But again, Davis Warren working himself into the starting position. Donovan Edwards was 27 yards on 11 carries. It was Mullings who had 15 carries for 92 yards. So just not a great look there with what we expected from returning player production, other than Loveland, who had 8 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. So not quite sure what we got with receivers there. Quarterbacks not looking so hot. Running backs looking a little sketchy so far. Defense still looks good. 3 sacks, several tackles for loss. The offensive line did have problems as well and got beat by the defensive front of the Fresno Bulldogs. The defensive line for the Wolverines was able to smack around and prevent the run game pretty much, hold the Bulldogs to less than 40 yards. So we'll see what they're able to do to the Texas Longhorns, but of course it's the deep balls from Ewers that are going to be a big deal, and whether he's able to distribute to his new group of receivers there. Hard to see how Michigan's going to be able to really move the ball effectively, even though Texas is rebuilding that back end of the defense, which is ranked in the hundreds last season. That being said, Michigan's defensive front might be able to disrupt Texas a bit. The offensive line might be more stable than it's been in years previous. The line's crept up to 7.5, opened at 7. I found it at 6.5. At one point, it could be a tough time to be a Wolverine fan in the big house. I'm leaning Texas to win this one comfortably, as they did when they went and played Alabama last season. It just looks like this is a good stretch for Texas football, but that is the noon game, the top watch. Number 3 Texas at number 10 Michigan. So that's the big noon Fox game. Overall, there are 11 games in the noon slot, Eastern time, of course, but there are several channel flippers worth checking out. ABC will have number 16 Oklahoma State hosting Arkansas. Oklahoma State favored by over a touchdown at the moment. Some points expected in this one. The Cowboys gave up quite a few to South Dakota State last week, although they were able to really get the offense rolling quite a bit there. Ollie Gordon, the top offensive motor in the offense there, over 100 yards, as well as 2 touchdowns on the ground in a 44-21 last week. Alan Bowman looked pretty good, and he's supposed to be really a weakness on the offense for this team, but he was 24 for 33 for 245 and a couple touchdowns as well. Ollie Gordon had 3 touchdowns last week. good receiving weapon there, and Dijon Stribling with 6 of the grabs for 83 yards. The defense has some problems. They gave up a good chunk of yards there to the Jackrabbits, 388, over 4 yards per carry and 7 yards per pass, which is a little scary. They did force a turnover, only had 1 penalty, and did not convert super well that you'd expect a team like this to do against a non-Power 5 squad. So some concerns, I would certainly say, for Oklahoma State off the rip. Arkansas, though, again, not a lot expected from this team this season. They opened up against Arkansas Pine Bluff and won 70-0, which is not a whole lot you can take from that game. In particular, they were 9 for 9 on third down, though. 687 yards total offense, 11 yards per pass, 8.5 per rush. So they just completely obliterated a lower-level squad. Taylon Green, who's the transfer in from Boise State, was 16 for 23 passing. They got a couple backups in here, so they were really successful when they ran their offense. Perhaps that's indicative of something. Defense did a good job. Arkansas Pine Bluff might just be that bad, but maybe this team did exactly what they should have done and beat just a much inferior opponent. Still, it lends me to think that perhaps a touchdown is too high a spread here, and this should be a very interesting ball game. So keep an eye on some points here on Arkansas at Oklahoma State. That could be a very interesting one. The other one I have on the slate here, Tulane hosting Kansas State. Both teams still undefeated. This is the ESPN with number 17 ranked Kansas State going on the road, favored by double digits. We have a new quarterback at the helm in Darian Minshaw under center for the Tulane group. There's the program went through a number of different changes, but they did win last week against Southeast Louisiana, 52-0. That's a good start for the program, at least. Kansas State beat UT Martin 41-6. Maybe a little bit of a slow start, you'd think, for that squad, but still, no level of competition for either of these teams. Avery Johnson, the true sophomore for the Wildcats there, 18 for 21 passing, 153, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Didn't get to use his legs a whole lot, but ran a few times. Got a few wide receivers in the mix there. Jace Brown, 5 catches for 71 yards. The main leader there. The defense looked strong as well, holding the UT Martin Skyhawks to 134 total yards. It seems like the offense could have been a little bit more efficient. They did have 2 turnovers. They didn't have any penalties, though. So perhaps they just need to clean that up a little bit. But going on the road here to a Tulane Green Wave program. The defense looked pretty good last week. Quarterback looks competent, 10 for 12, 205, and 2 touchdowns. Can throw the ball a little bit. Ran for over 200 yards. They have some guys that can catch, some guys that can tackle. So it looks like Tulane could be in the mix here. I don't know if this will be a runaway game by double digits either. Syracuse will be hosting Georgia Tech as the third game I have in the channel flipper spot. Georgia Tech at 2-0 already, ranked 23rd as they move into the rankings. They're favored by 3 on the road on the ACC network. Point total currently sits in the 60s as we expect this very mobile offense of Georgia Tech to get going here behind Haynes King, able to move the ball around a little bit here. Did damage to both Florida State and Georgia Southern last week, but giving up a combined 33 points to these two teams that are not particularly potent offensively, while averaging just about 30 points a game. So they look pretty solid, but are still building, I think, moving forward here. So on the road at Syracuse, then have VMI before playing at Louisville for what's a huge game. Still makes this one very losable for this particular squad. Syracuse had a 38-22 win over a decent MAC program, we think, in Ohio this season. Of course, we have the Ohio State transfer Kyle McCord in the game, 27 for 39. 354 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a pick. They certainly needed him in there. LaQuinton Allen had 15 carries for 98 yards in this one to do some damage, and they managed to to pull this one out. It was really a bigger margin than it would seem in that 22 points, but they gave up a whole bunch of yards. 480 to 436 was the margin, even though they really prevented Ohio from really getting in this game too much. It is worth noting that they gave up a whole bundle, 200 plus yards on the ground, over 200 yards to Anthony Tyrus, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So perhaps there is a way for Georgia Tech to rip them apart on the ground. So keep an eye on that one as well. So that's Arkansas at Oklahoma State, Kansas State at Tulane, Georgia Tech at Syracuse is the channel flippers. A few of the other notable games here in the noon slot. You do have Penn State, currently ranked number 8th, hosting Bowling Green. That'll be in the Big Ten Network, of course. Penn State favored by over 30 points. In this one, get to see Drew Aller back out there and their pair of running backs. Well, Singleton clearly looks like the number one guy there for the Penn State Nittany Lions. Also for Bowling Green, who was 1-0, Tyrion Stewart had 3 touchdowns and 161 yards on 14 carries last week in beating up on Fordham for what that is worth. Looked like a really good tailback for that particular squad. Minnesota will be hosting Rhode Island. Minnesota lost their opener, of course. Rhode Island, a mighty 1-0. This will be squirreled away on Peacock. The Golden Gophers dropped their opener to North Carolina 19-17. They missed a field goal as time expired. They're playing North Carolina's backup quarterback for a good chunk of that. Looks like a questionable team moving forward, but at least the defense will be strong, as we know. Rutgers, again, favorable schedule. They'll be hosting Akron, a team that either gave Ohio State problems in their opener or Ohio State was sluggish or some combination, but they'll be hosting Akron at noon on the Big Ten Network. 22-point favorites in that one. Cincinnati will be hosting Pittsburgh, a couple of 1-0 teams right off the rip in a non-conference Power 5. This is non-conference, right? You have to double check these things now. Non-conference Power 5 matchup on ESPN2. Cincinnati favored by just a pair of points with a 63.5 point over-under. Desmond Reed from Pittsburgh, 145 yards and a touchdown last week. Pitt was in a battle for with Kent State for a little bit there, won it 55-24. Seems like a team that's not going to do a whole lot this year, but might be a little bit interesting there. And Cincinnati, man, 38-20 win over Townsend. Did not look very good there. Brandon Sorsby is the quarterback there. Might be all right. A couple weapons, but man, it should not be in a battle with Townsend by any measure. Also have Memphis hosting Troy. This one will be over on the ESPNU. Memphis favored by 18.5 at the moment. They beat North Alabama 40-0. Not a lot to take from that one, but again, a high-powered offense expected this season as they kind of took it easy on the North Alabama Lions. Not a whole lot to take from that victory. 367 yards of offense, forced 3 turnovers. Actually would have expected more points on the board. The Trojans lost to Nevada 28-26 in their opener. Didn't convert a 2-point conversion as would be expected. So either Nevada's a little bit feistier than we thought, or perhaps Troy is down a notch, or it was just a weird opening game for them. Nevada obviously played in week 0, so it was their second game. But Troy, hard to say what's going on with them. So Memphis clearly favored for that particular reason. The afternoon slate of games, which technically I grouped in starting at like 2 o'clock Eastern time. I did slide in the 12:45 Texas A&M McNeese game on the SEC network to see if Texas A&M can bounce back. They should, obviously, against McNeese, but that'll be on the SEC network there. So your afternoon slate, Eastern time, starts with some notables at 2 o'clock. Georgia taking on Tennessee Tech at 2 o'clock on ESPN+. Notre Dame will be taking on Northern Illinois at 3:30 on NBC and Peacock as well. Louisville will be taking on Jacksonville State at 3:30 as well on ESPN+. They broke into the rankings at the 22 spot and will be heavy favorites here. We do have Maryland hosting Michigan State. Maryland pretty heavy favorites, more than a touchdown at home, as that defense looks pretty good there. Could be a low-scoring game. 43.5 point over-under. Michigan State didn't look so great in their opener. A child struggling, and defense looks okay, but they had some injuries as well. 50-0 win over UConn for Maryland, and their opener. Nothing super spectacular per se. New quarterback there, Billy Edwards Jr. looked pretty solid. Got a couple other guys in the mix as well, but nothing super spectacular. So we'll see what happens in that game. Washington will be hosting Eastern Michigan on the Big Ten Network at 3:30. Poor Eastern Michigan has to fly all the way across the country to play the Huskies there. Wisconsin's hosting South Dakota at 3:30 on FS1. Watch out, the Bears, I believe they are, the Grizzlies, the Coyotes, there we go. One of those. The South Dakota Coyotes are a decent lower level squad there, so Wisconsin better get it into gear there. Boston College, a surprisingly feisty team there, did some damage to Florida State. Great offense there. They'll be hosting Duquesne at 3:30 on ESPN+. North Carolina will be hosting Charlotte at 3:30 on the ACC network. Ole Miss will be ready to put up another 70 burger this week, hosting Middle Tennessee at 4:15 on the SEC network. And Virginia Tech, 4:30, be hosting Marshall on the CW network, trying to bounce back after that loss to Vanderbilt. Trying to make some moves in the ACC, a dark horse competitor there, but man, losing in overtime to Vanderbilt after falling behind early, not a great place to be. So those are some of the games that'll be going on with at least one team of note. Your top watch, though, in the afternoon is going to be probably Iowa hosting Iowa State. That's number one on my slate. Iowa currently ranked 21st. They moved the ball a little bit last week. They threw the ball to some receivers. I'm not sure the offense is just going to open up or anything like that. 3-point favorites at home. Defensive battle. Beckett is a good quarterback over there for Iowa State. 35.5 point over under. Not going to be the most exciting game. You have to kind of like, I think, Iowa State on the road, quite frankly, even though it's a home field favorite spread going Iowa's way. But this is the CBS game, Iowa hosting Iowa State. There are going to be plenty of channel flipping options as well. Utah will be hosting Baylor. Not a lot expected from the Bears. Utah, of course, hoping to roll here with a nice, comfortable spread on this one. Cam Rising did just fine last week, over 2 touchdown favorites here. This is the 3:30 Fox game. They rolled Southern Utah 49-0 last week. Looked just fine on both sides of the ball against inferior competition. Rising had 5 touchdowns last week, 3 to the tight end replacement, making up for the loss of one of their studs there. Moving on to the NFL, so Brent Kuth made quite an impact there, and Baylor moved to 1-0 with a pretty easy win over Tarleton State, which is supposed to have a pretty good football program, to my understanding. But Utah will be hosting Baylor there, favored by a couple of touchdowns on Fox. Auburn will be hosting California. I don't have high expectations for California this particular season. 3:30 on ESPN, though. This game will be going on. Cal 31-13 over UC Davis last week. I don't think they're going to be particularly impactful, even in the ACC, where there's room to do some damage. Auburn, 70-plus points, 73-3 against Alabama A&M last week. Peyton Thorne had 5 total touchdowns in this ball game, 4 passing, 1 on the ground. He's not known for doing that. Of course, he's been assigned to more of ground duty, particularly last season. They've got some receiving weapons here. Malcolm Simmons, Perry Thompson look good. Keandre Lambert Smith, some impactful defensive players, and they're less than 2 touchdown favorites over Cal, which surprises me a little bit with the Bears having to fly across the country here. But take a look. Auburn, top of my channel flip teams, and this is a good opportunity to take a look at them pounding Cal. They did come away with a victory last season. And then Kentucky, you'll be hosting South Carolina. Again, couple of 1-0 teams, 3:30. This is the ESPN game. Kentucky favored by double digits in this one. They did win 31-0 over Southern Miss last week. Not really expected to be an upper half team. Not really looking that way either. Brock Vandergriff, 12 for 18, 3 touchdowns and a pick in his debut for the Wildcats. Of course, he sat on the Georgia bench for a couple of years. Fine job. Much inferior competition. South Carolina survival dominion, 23-13. You'd expect Kentucky to come away with this one if they're halfway decent. So plenty of options in a not very busy middle afternoon slate there. And the evening gives us many more options. So 33 games in the evening window, 22 in that afternoon slot. So the evening really opens up for us, and we have a couple of top options, whether you're watching NC State hosting Tennessee or Nebraska hosting Colorado. I have those as the top games on the slate. With your channel flippers, Illinois hosting Kansas and Alabama hosting South Florida, although that could turn into a rout, so just bear that in mind. But NC State remains in the rankings. They looked a little sluggish to me last week overall. They tend to be disappointing despite being a regularly appearer in the top 25, shall we say. Nevertheless, Grayson McCall, who's over there as a transfer in at quarterback, piloted a 38-21 win over West Carolina that really came in the second half, 21-0. They outscored the WCU team there in the fourth quarter and pulled it out 26 for 40 passing, 318 yards, 3 touchdowns for the Wolfpack there, and 522 yards, but they gave up 361, kind of uncharacteristically, giving up 6.3 yards per carry. Did give up a whole lot of rushing attempts, but just kind of a weird game there. Tennessee obviously blew the hell out of a much inferior squad there in Chattanooga, 69 points on the board, rookie quarterback in Nico there, and they will have a real opportunity to go on the road here and beat a ranked team. Tennessee's currently 14th. This is the 7:30 ABC game. Tennessee's favored by 8.5 on the road currently right now. This will be a fun one to see if Tennessee can really look like a dark horse playoff team here in the mix. Nebraska, Colorado. We know what this is. We have a freshman quarterback in Nebraska trying to bring this team back to relevance. They won last week. Colorado, of course, won last week. Looked pretty good for his first start in a 40-7 win over UTEP. 2 touchdowns and a pick for Raiola. Dylan Raiola, 19 for 27 for 238 overall. I'm sorry, he didn't have a pick, just 2 touchdowns for the young man there. And Nebraska got going on the ground. They were pretty good defensively in beating up on the Miners. And this is a team that still has to clean up a few things. But we know that Colorado is similar to how they were last year and just going to have a problem in the trenches. Nebraska's over a touchdown favorite right now. This is the NBC Peacock game. It's 7:30, and Nebraska looks to be in good shape to pull an upset. But we have some real skill position guys for Colorado. And look for Hunter to possibly get some Heisman buzz if he's able to put some more points on the board here, and Colorado pulls an upset possibly. 3 touchdowns last week, played all but 5 snaps, so just keep that in the back of your mind going into this one. Your channel flippers then. Of course, those 2 games will keep you busy, but Illinois, not a high bar for that team this year, but I love Kansas. I love Jalen Daniels. It took him a minute to get going last week. Devin Neal, the star running back in the backfield with him there, did get going, and this team did ultimately pull a win out last week, a blowout win as was expected. They played, let's see here, Linden, that's who it was, 48-3. So it was a little sluggish for them to get going there. 27 points in the second quarter to pull that one out. But the Jayhawks getting a test on the road here in Big Ten country. Illinois still has Luke Altmaier, the former Ole Miss running Rebel back there. They won 45-0 over East Illinois, so we have no real measuring stick for either of these teams. I mean, not even close. But Illinois did not look super great last week, quite frankly. Wasn't super productive moving the ball. They didn't turn it over, forced for 4 turnovers by Eastern Illinois. But again, not a lot to take from the performances of either of these teams per se. But Kansas favored by 5.5 on the road. This is a 7 o'clock start on FS1, so you can get a peek at this one before the kickoff of either of the other two to kind of gauge that first quarter. And then Alabama only beat South Florida by 7 points. It was 17-10, I believe, last year. South Florida, whose defense wasn't very good last season, but just interesting that they matched up pretty good against Alabama. Played a nobody last week, have an interesting quarterback in Byron Brown. Alabama's favored by 30 points. They looked pretty splendid last week. They could very well splatter Florida Atlantic. Yeah, they beat Western Kentucky 63-0 last week, so that wouldn't be too surprising. This team looks like it's firing on all cylinders, so this could quickly fall off the radar, but I'd put this in the channel flippers if it were to become interesting. There's a whole slew of other notable games just to keep on your radar. Miami will be hosting Florida A&M. If you want to check out what that team's doing, they can take a little bit of a lull here after the big win in Gainesville last week. That game is squirreled away on ESPN Plus at 6 o'clock. West Virginia rebounding after the Penn State splattering last week. They're playing Albany at 6 o'clock as well on ESPN Plus. We do have Ohio hosting South Alabama on ESPN Plus at 6 o'clock as well. Just a couple of interesting, as of right now, mid-tier, lower-level teams at the moment. Central Florida will be hosting Sam Houston at 6:30 on ESPN Plus. That offense for Central Florida looks very interesting with KJ Jefferson. They put up 57 on New Hampshire last week. Missouri will be hosting Buffalo at 7 on ESPN Plus. Florida will be starting a true freshman quarterback there. He did wander into the starting lineup last week when Graham Mertz went out. Graham Mertz really hasn't been super impressive. So Legway will be stepping in. He wasn't, very impressive against Miami. No one really was. But he'll be able to throw the ball and do some things against Samford. 7 o'clock ESPN Plus. Maybe we'll see some changes there overall then. Who knows? Stanford will be hosting Cal Poly. Almost not noting at all, but, I have a soft spot for Stanford. That's 7 o'clock on ESPN Plus. Wake Forest will be hosting Virginia on ESPN2 at 7 o'clock. These teams aren't going to get a lot of wins on the season, probably. So it'll be another one for one of those guys. Air Force, still looking like a team that could compete for the Mountain West, possibly. Hosting San Jose State, 7 o'clock on the CBS Sports Network. Ohio State will be on the board in the evening, but they're playing Western Michigan. Big Ten Network at 7 o'clock. Nearly 40-point favorites again. I think we're going to learn pretty quickly that number's a little too high. LSU hosting Nicholas. 7:30 on ESPN Plus. Get to see a plethora of points there. Vanderbilt is playing Alcorn State. 7:30 ESPNU. So as good as they looked last week, they're not going to play very good competition. North Texas, potent offense as usual. They're hosting Stephen F. Austin at 7:30 on ESPN+. Just worth noting, another lower level non-Power 4 team there that could be interesting as of right now. Oklahoma will be hosting Houston on the SEC network. Oklahoma up to 15th. This is a weird 7:45 start. I think the SEC network's intentionally trying to stagger some start times here, if I had to guess. 51-3, they beat Temple last week. Pretty big win for them, even though Temple's not any good, but good appearance for Jackson Arnold to come out, complete 17 of 25, and people are going to look at that and the 141 yards and say, well, he didn't do a whole lot. Well, no shit. 4 touchdowns, though. He did what he had to do. Rolled up 200 yards on the ground, and the defense, similar to bad Temple team. That's exactly what you would expect. So, Oklahoma looking good so far to start the season. Houston's fallen on hard times. They've had some good years recently, of course, but recruiting hasn't been great, and it coincided with moving to the Big 12. 27-7 UNLV beat Houston last week, so not a good start for the Cougars so far. Clemson hosting Appalachian State. Clemson's still ranked 25th. This is the 8 o'clock ACC network. They're favored by 16.5. App State still rolls a very competent program out there. They beat ETSU 38-10 last week. This is still a team that can win the Sun Belt, which at least in its own group is very competitive. Joey Aguilar is a very competent quarterback. Over 300 yards last week. Not that, again, the competition's necessarily anything exciting, but this is a team that can push Clemson, I think, for a half, maybe. I don't know. This could perhaps make the channel flipper section. And finally, TCU will be hosting Long Island University at 8 o'clock on ESPN+. So a plethora of games you're probably not going to watch unless you want to see how a team's performing next week or this coming Saturday. Ohio State, LSU, Oklahoma, Clemson, Missouri, Florida's quarterback. And then a couple channel flipping options and a couple top ones there in Tennessee, NC State, Colorado, Nebraska. Finally, our late night slate gives us a whopping 9 games and gives us an opportunity to actually fill out our categories here. Your top watch is going to be number 7 Oregon hosting Boise State, 10 o'clock. This is on Peacock, unfortunately. So if you have an opportunity to pull that up, then do so. Boise State can be dangerous. The defense is not very good. Jonte Austin, the running back, had 6 touchdowns last week. He was one of the top players in the Mountain West last season. And the quarterback looked pretty solid in guiding the team down the field as well. So the offense actually looks pretty good there. 56 points on Georgia Southern last week, but they gave up 45. Oregon, of course, was sluggish. They had some offensive linemen out. I think they're getting some guys back this week, so they should be more productive. They're almost 20-point favorites here, but this could be an interesting game for a half, I would think. Like, is Oregon really going to get chugging along here? Can Boise hang? I think I'm going to have my eyes on this and be very excited for this game. Channel flippers then. We have options. Washington State will be hosting Texas Tech. Washington State, of course, not in a conference technically this season, can't win a conference title. Basically signed a deal with the Mountain West and is playing 7 Mountain West games, I think. But they'll be hosting Texas Tech at 10 o'clock on Fox. Favored by less than a field goal. Texas Tech Red Raiders aren't particularly exciting, but we will get to see a couple of squads go at it here. Abilene Christie, 52-51 in overtime, was the final for the Red Raiders, surviving that game. So, less than a field goal favorite at home. Washington State tells you about where those two teams are at. But a 65.5 point over-under will get points in this one. Arizona State, as I've noted, good coach, good, a well-coached team. Kenny Dillingham trying to build here on this team that's having not troubles recruiting, but it's certainly an uphill battle here. Beat Wyoming 48-7. Looked pretty competent last week. Sam Livet came in from Michigan State, and they did a good job putting away the Cowboys and shutting them out for 3 quarters, taking a 48-0 lead in this football game, over 200 yards on the ground, and just did a really good job against what is generally considered a pretty good Mountain West team. Held them to 3 for 13 on third down, 118 yards of offense while putting up 499 of their own, 8 for 15 on third down, forcing 3 turnovers, 3-0 turnover margin. Looked pretty decent. I mean, really did. Against, I guess, if you have 3 levels of non-Power 5 teams, high, medium, low, I would put Wyoming at least at a mid-level. This is a respectable win, especially to blow them out, especially for the bottom rung of a Power 5 squad. But the Sun Devils will be hosting Mississippi State, which is about equivalent to the Sun Devils, at 10:30 on ESPN. 6 points is the spread. We're right around a 60-point over-under. Mississippi State 56-7 over Eastern Kentucky last week. And this team's moved on from its intern coach, defensive-centric. Blake Shapen, the former Baylor Bears, under center there, 15 for 20 for 247 and 3 touchdowns last week. And this could be a fun one between 2 rebuilding programs here. USC will be hosting Utah State. USC's favored by 28.5. This is 11 o'clock. The latest game starts. And the Big Ten Network and USC. Man, so weird to see, right? But the Trojans looked good, showed their skill guy, showed their quarterback off against LSU last week. And you'll get to see them again against Utah State, who beat Robert Morris 36-14 last week in their opener. Really came out at the end of that game, 26 points. In the second half, they don't look particularly threatening, but you'll get a glance at more of USC's weapons. Then the other games that fall in this notable section here, Arizona, that high-powered offense, they're currently ranked 20th. They slid up 1 spot this week. They'll be hosting Northern Arizona at 10 o'clock on ESPN+. McMillan will have an opportunity to move into the Heisman conversation through 2 games, as he'll be able to add to his 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, even if it's not against high resume building opponents. Fresno State will be hosting Sacramento State at 10 o'clock as they hope to get their first win of the season. New Mexico State will be hosting Liberty at 10:15 on ESPN2. Remember, the Flames can make the playoffs. They have the easiest schedule in the country. They struggled against Campbell 41-24 last week. So this will be a step up. We'll see if they can perform in order to keep their playoff hopes on the line. And finally, the 10:30 CBS Sports Network, Oregon State favored by less than a touchdown at San Diego State as that program there, the Aztecs, is rebuilding. And the Beavers find themselves in a similar situation as Washington State and have their schedule filled with Mountain West teams this year. So that is your late night slate. All right, filling out our watch categories here. Let's look at last week real quick. So the top watch, must-watch game last week, Georgia-Clemson, was obviously a pretty lopsided game, but I don't know if there's another one I would have chosen. Try to stick with the Saturday slate. USC LSU is probably the other one I would have picked, but it was a different day, and I was trying to stick with Saturday games, so not bad there. Top audible game was Penn State West Virginia. That was a beating. I think there might have been other options in that in that particular slot when I picked that game, but still got to see Penn State there. Boise State at Georgia Southern, small screen starlets. That was the best of these smaller non-Power 5 squads. Definitely, I think, underrated games. I had either South Dakota and Oklahoma State, but also Vandy and Virginia Tech. So good on me for picking a couple decent battles there. Late night snack was Arizona putting up a bundle with McMillan there late night. So this week we have our must-watch game. Michigan and Texas is the easy selection here. Two teams fighting for a playoff spot. Texas perhaps competing ultimately for a championship. And of course, this will be the big noon game, 9 a.m. on the West Coast. Audible. A good game to switch off of if the time slot gets kind of bogged down. I have Auburn hosting California. As we discussed, Auburn, I think, is a little bit better than the 2-touchdown line, but this was a competitive game last year. They looked good in their opener, and this is my top team to channel flip onto. So putting them up against at least a Power 5 team from a different conference, even though the conferences are all over the place now, will be interesting to see here in the afternoon, which is really kind of a dead spot. So that's what I have there as the top channel flip option in the late afternoon. Our check down, our small screen starlet option. Not a lot of great options, I don't think, as we have a lot of mismatches on the schedule here, obviously. But I have Memphis hoping to win the American hosting Troy, who is competing in the Sun Belt. Underrated good game. I have Oklahoma State in here again this week hosting Arkansas. The Razorbacks looked pretty competent last week. They have the transfer quarterback in there, Talon Green from Boise State. They look like they have a pretty good offense. Defense couldn't possibly be as bad as it was last season, where they had a number of injuries, played a devastating schedule. Oklahoma State still in the hunt for the Big 12. Their defense doesn't look particularly good. Alan Bowman, the quarterback, the weakness in that offense looked okay last week. Ollie Gordon still looked solid. And I think this will be low-key a pretty exciting game there. Obviously, I had it in my channel flip section in that afternoon as well, in the noon section as well, but worth keeping an eye on while Michigan and Texas is going on. Going back to that same time slot, Hail Mary or upset game, I have Tulane hosting Kansas State. That would really throw a wrench in things for Kansas State. Yet another Big 12 team in here too, like Oklahoma State as well. Just teams trying to find the pecking order there. Oklahoma's got an easier game, obviously, as we discussed earlier. But Kansas State on the road at Tulane. Their true sophomore quarterback looked a little iffy there last week. And they're just replacing a few odds and ends. But this is a ranked squad, 17th ranked right now. They're favored by just, about 9 points, I think they are right now. And Tulane, just replacing coaching staff, replacing players, all kinds of stuff. But this is supposed to be a lower scoring game, and the Green Wave, I think, still looks like an okay, competent team. So just keep an eye on that one as well in the noon window. And finally, your late night snack is obviously Oregon hosting Boise State. Although if that gets out of control, we do have plenty of other options on the slate. Please enjoy your football games this weekend, mixing in on my NFL thoughts in between my college podcasts. I appreciate you listening. Enjoy all the football this upcoming weekend. Thank you.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a